Hi everyone, it's Alison Circle. I'm Chief Customer Experience Officer here at Columbus Metropolitan Library, and today we're going to be talking about the CEO perspective when it comes to customer experience. And to do that, we have today the CEO of Columbus Metropolitan Library and my boss, Pat Losinski.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, today what we want to start with is talking about certainly the customer experience, but I'm very proud of the legacy that CML has around a customer focus. So fill us in a little bit on how that got started and what you inherited even when you came here.
My predecessor, Larry Black, was one of the first library directors in the country, certainly at an urban library director, to decide at some point that he was going to refer to library users as customers instead of patrons. And that may seem like something that's really slight, but it was actually monumental in terms of how this organization thought about the users and the fact that he could develop a whole culture and program and training around the notion of excellent customer service. And I think what we've tried to do is really build on that legacy and to continue to move it forward for today's world.
In 2012, you changed the traditional title of a deputy director to a chief customer experience officer, which I am very grateful that I was selected for. But what was the thinking behind making that change, and what have you perceived in our industry in terms of reaction to that change?
One, it was meant, if not to shock, at least give people pause to say, what's different about this? And a sense that our industry, like so many industries, is changing so dramatically that we had to have a signal that we were going to lead from a different position. And frankly, from a position that wasn't the traditional library approach. And so I think that was certainly a part of what we were looking for. It was also a chance to say there are 4 or 5 customer touch points within our organization, and they're not under the leadership of a single person. They were more decentralized. And so this was an attempt to bring not only the retail operation of the library, but things like marketing and the purchase of materials, all under the umbrella of someone who would look at it from a very strong customer vantage point. And I think that's what you've done so well here at CML.
Well, here's a topic I know we can go on forever on. And this is, what are the disruptors? You talk about how our industry is changing. What are some of those disruptors that are happening today, and the ones in particular that can be addressed by a customer experience focus?
There was a time when we'd say, well, everything that competes for people's time is not only a disruptor, but is competition for the library experience. I think most people today point to the digital dissemination of information. A story I've been telling recently is I heard an interview on NPR from the new CEO of Hulu, and they have 800,000 subscribers to their online streaming service. And the average customer of those 800,000, the average streams 100 hours per month. And that just blew me away in terms of thinking how much time someone would be spending in that activity. That's a new experience. 30 years ago, they would have either watched network TV or they might have spent more time checking out material at the library, including digital content, or back then VHS tapes. So that's very different, something that's happening in people's homes, or frankly wherever their device might be. I think that's a significant disruptor to what we're seeing in the traditional library role.
Well, and how does customer experience, how does that lens overlay on that disruptor? Why then does CX become relevant in that scenario?
Well, I think that a couple of things come to mind. One, I think you had championed a particular book,
Outside In?
But it was the notion, are we thinking about the customer from our perspective, meaning in, out to the customer, or are we thinking about it from the standpoint of the customer into us? And really trying to think deeply about, well, how has that new service disrupted that customer? and how do we respond to it? I think that takes just a shift from where we've been before, thinking, well, this is a library, we circulate material, people are going to continue to come in and circulate material. Well, they're not. They're not at the same level, so how do we continue to make the library relevant? And I think that can only happen from really studying the customer experience and frankly understanding their expectations.
Well, and for me, the other piece of it is that people become more important. And you often talk about how we used to be a warehouse for books or built for the collections, and now it's about connections. And to me, a really important piece of that is the people who work here and become trusted people in the community, and having a consistent approach around what we're trying to do with the people, and that customer experience really helps to make that connection as well.
It really does.
So are there other ways that you think the customer experience has helped CML?
A great example is because of some of the work that you've done and some of the contacts that you've made outside of the industry, two things happen. One, we're able to extrapolate from outside industries. What are we learning about what's happening at Safelight and at other places that are, large corporations here in town, and then some of your global experiences? We bring that knowledge back to the library and say, well, that might not be an exact fit, but how do we adjust just a little bit to make sure that will work here in the library environment? And then almost this inside out, outside in. I think the other is, because of our involvement on a stage with corporations where maybe libraries are not expected to be, there's a sense that, wow, our library is not just in the library profession, but we've taken it up a notch, and we're considered right along some of the largest corporations in the country, and I think that just helps with our institutional reputation and gives us increased credibility.
Well, and thinking about that, I try to use the language that we're a library in the customer business. We're not a library in the book business. And to really help us continue to keep that strong-eyed focus on the people that we're serving.
Well, and if I were to add to that, so we're in Columbus, Ohio. I'm reminded that I say this more often because people have mentioned it to me. They say I'm not in the Columbus Metropolitan Library business. I'm in the business of Columbus. It just happens to be leading the library, and that's a subtle shift, but I think it's important. Mm-hmm. How do we leverage this institution to not only provide the level of service to our customers, but to elevate and raise the profile of this entire region through the library? At one point I didn't understand that. Today I do, and I think we've been successful on a number of different fronts.
A lot of people I speak to out in the CX world struggle in making their case to a CEO around why customer experience matters and why that investment matters. What advice do you have to people who are struggling, or what would you say to a CEO, maybe more relevantly, to a CEO about why they should really invest in customer experience?
Well, it actually is I must admit, it's really hard for me to understand how someone would have difficulty embracing that concept in today's world, because for all of us, it's ultimately about our customers that determine our livelihood. So how are we relating to them? How are we understanding them? How are we conducting research? And so to not be in that game in 2018 is actually a little bit shocking to me. So I must admit, I'm a little bit incredulous to say, well, gosh, we have to convince in today's world that customer experience is something that we ought to concern ourselves with. So I think you just talk through it patiently and try to understand their perspective, and I'm an advocate and a believer because I've seen the results in our organization, and just hopefully can convince people that it's certainly worth reviewing and looking at. We're all in this world that's changing so rapidly, and any advantage that we can get today is important.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave the conversation. Great last message for people. Thanks for your time today, and thanks again for letting me have this great role here at the library.
You're welcome, and thanks for all that you do.
Thank you. See you all later.